So the last 2 weeks, we've been reading from the Sermon on the Mount. And those were readings kind of about the disciples as individuals. Right? You are blessed, then you are salt, you are light. And now that they've heard about themselves, it's time to shift focus outside of themselves. So now we hear about how we're supposed to protect each other for the good of the community at large. Following Jesus is not a personal and private thing. It's a communal religion. And we are to act in ways that honor the good of the whole, not just ourselves. And Jesus continues to go through the law, more specifically the 10 Commandments. And we refer to this section called the antithesis. Jesus says, "You've heard it said, but now I say." He seems to be making these rules stricter. He says, "You know not to murder, but if you think a bad thought about someone, that's like you murdered them. And you know not to commit adultery, but if you even think about it, you already have." So how can anyone ever hope to live up to these new, stricter commandments? The thing is that Jesus often uses hyperbole, which is exaggeration, to make a point. Like if I say, "I'm so hungry I could eat a horse," or "I thought I was just going to die of embarrassment." Now, it's easy to take these antitheses today and make them moralistic, to follow them and then judge other people because they don't, in your opinion, follow them. But if we do that, we're not really understanding the text. That's only a surface reading, and surface morality is way too easy, and it's quite dangerous. You always have to examine the context of Jesus' teachings, because nothing ever happens in a vacuum. So he is interpreting the ancient law for his contemporary disciples. And this is not a new practice. The rabbis, the Pharisees, Sadducees, the high priests have all been doing this for as long as the law existed and continue to, and we still do it now. Jesus is broadening the meaning for his followers. He's encouraging his disciples to think about the deeper meaning behind the rules. If you just follow the rules because they're there and you feel like you have to, but you don't actually believe in them, then your actions are pretty empty. Going through the motions out of obligation is not a good thing. It's about being intentional, and it's all about our relationships with each other and learning how to treat each other well. Jesus talks about what a life in God's kingdom should look like. You shouldn't murder anyone. Duh, right? Don't do that. But not just that, you shouldn't hate or hold grudges against people. My old boss, Father Rick, always says, "Hating someone else is like you drinking poison and expecting them to die." Jesus calls us here not only to not kill each other, but to respect each other, to not harbor grudges, to forgive and make peace and reconcile with each other. So next he addresses adultery, and this is the hard one because we get a little uncomfortable. It's not enough to just not commit adultery. You're also not supposed to think about another person in any sort of lustful way. He's saying we shouldn't objectify people for our own selfish wants. And this links directly to this divorce rule. Don't get divorced except for unchastity. But in this case, Jesus makes the rule stricter for a good reason. Because back then, women were property and were not allowed, generally speaking, to work. If a woman was without a husband, she couldn't own property or do anything. And if the woman was found to be unchaste, she could be stoned to death, or at least left to starve, whether or not the accusations are true. Read the book of Susanna if you want to hear more about that. Jesus understands that this behavior is not righteous. He has female disciples, and he treats them as equals to the male disciples because, shocking, women are equal. His own mother, who was pregnant and unmarried, could have been stoned to death if it had not been for the kindness of Joseph, who was a righteous man. So in this case, Jesus is protecting people. Because back then, a woman could have been divorced for just about any reason. One of these reasons was for burning bread. That was the law. It was legal. But is that right? Is that a righteous thing? So here, Jesus is saying that people are not disposable. Divorce is often necessary. Sometimes it's the better option than staying together. And nowadays it's different. Women can work and own property and be self-sufficient. Times change, and we also must change. But it's never an easy decision. We have to be careful about how we treat people, even people who have wronged us in some way. So all of this hyperbole serves to magnify how important our relationships are to God. We are all here together. God didn't create the law so that God could keep track of us, and it's not a punch card ticket to heaven. Because remember, Jesus said last week that those who keep the commandments will be the greatest in the kingdom, and those that don't will be last in the kingdom. But note that everyone is still in the kingdom. No one gets left out. These laws are to protect us from each other. Parents, many of you are parents, make rules for their kids, rules that the kids often don't understand. Like, no, you can't play in traffic. You can't shove beans up your nose. And you can't go sledding without your gloves. Kids don't understand often until they're older why these rules exist. And we are God's children. And these commandments are not in place to abuse people or to think that we're better than other people or to keep a list of all our righteous behaviors. Absolutely not. The point is to show us how to treat each other rightly because we just can't seem to get that. Because that's what truly pleases God. Because God created everybody just as they are. All different ethnicities, all sexual orientations, all gender identities, all religions, all political opinions, all people were made by God. And we all have to live together and respect each other and treat each other as we want to be treated, no matter how different we are. I meet a lot of people who've been hurt by the church, in quotes, because of all this religious righteousness and surface morality, turned away from the church and told that they're not good enough to be loved by God. And this makes me very upset, because this is the opposite of what Jesus taught us. All people love, all people cry, all people have to muddle through the same problems. And Jesus just wants us to love each other and treat each other the way we want to be treated, with understanding, and to have just and fair relationships. And that's the point. Jesus is Emmanuel. And Caroline Lewis explains, when we remember that God is with us, not just God is with me, we begin to realize that we are not simply members of a community, but we are shapers of the community and are shaped by the community, all of which tells a critical theological truth. Our God is a God of community. And I know that this is hard because people are complicated. And the things that we do affect other people, whether positively or negatively. And we always have to be aware of that. But we also need to forgive, not harbor grudges, and not treat other humans as disposable. The greatest lesson we can find in this passage is that we can follow the rules, but always remember why. Never follow any rule blindly. God never said that we had to do that. Following any rule just for the sake of it is futile. Always know what you're doing and be intentional. Then maybe we can be first in the kingdom. But that's not that important. More importantly, we can work towards making God's kingdom exist in our own lifetimes. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.